Good morning, everyone. May I request Honorable Vice Chancellor, sir, to kindly usher the dignitaries onto the dais. Ladies and gentlemen, the chief guest of the inaugural program, Honorable Mr. Justice Dinesh Maheshwari, sir, Chairperson of the Law Commission of India, and guest of honor of the session, Ms. Lucy Gorman, Consul General of the United Kingdom for Spain and Andorra. To commence this august gathering, may I request the audience to rise for the rendition of the state anthem of Assam. Thank you. May the audience be seated, please. At the outset, I invite the dignitaries to light the ceremonial lamp, a symbolic gesture invoking grace upon the endeavor that is to unfold. We thank the dignitaries for gracing this moment with their light and presence. Thank you so much. I have the honor to offer a brief introduction to the conference that brings us together today, the second International Conference on Global Criminology and Victimology 2025. This distinguished gathering represents a collective commitment to rethinking how justice is imagined, experienced, and administered in the contemporary society. Anchored in an interdisciplinary approach, this conference convenes a global community of scholars, practitioners, policymakers to explore pressing questions at the intersection of crime, justice, and human dignity. At a time when criminal justice systems worldwide face increasing demands for equity, inclusion, and responsiveness, this conference seeks to place the human experience, both of those affected by crime and those working within the justice systems, at the heart of all deliberations. Through a wide range of themes that span human-centered policing, restorative approaches, environmental justice, and the integration of technology in justice systems, the conference reflects a forward-looking vision grounded in both empirical insight and ethical purpose. With over 400 participants and 25 eminent speakers joining us from across the country and abroad, ICGCV 2025 is more than just an academic event. It is a collaborative platform, a discursive space for new ideas to take root, for research to shape practice, for networks to form, transcending disciplines and borders. It's our hope that the discussions that unfold over the next 3 days will not only deepen our understanding of crime and victimization in diverse contexts, but also inspire a shared commitment to building more inclusive, compassionate, and effective justice systems. Welcome all to this important conversation. We are honored by your presence and participation. Thank you. To begin the agenda of this session, may I call upon the Vice Chancellor of National Law University and Judicial Academy, Assam, and Chief Patron of ICGCV 2025 to deliver the welcome address.
Good morning all of you. Honorable Sri Justice Dinesh Maheshwari, Chairman, Law Commission of India, and former Judge, Supreme Court of India, today's chief guest, Ms. Lucy Gorman, Consul General of United Kingdom for Spain and Andorra, British Consulate, General, Barcelona, today's guest of honor, Professor Y.S.R. Murthy, former Vice Chancellor, RB University, Bangalore, Royal Global University, Assam, co-patron, Dr. Bhanu Prakash, founder and managing director, Think Justice Foundation, and Vice President, World Society of Victimology, Dr. Ginojit Roy, ACS, convener, ICGCV 2025, and Registrar, National Law University and Judicial Academy, Assam, esteemed dignitaries, respected faculty colleagues, students, distinguished speakers, delegates, ladies and gentlemen. A very good morning to all of you. It gives me immense pleasure to welcome you all to the inaugural function of the second International Conference on Global Criminology and Victimology 2025, being hosted by the National Law University and Judicial Academy, Assam. We are deeply honored to have with us Honorable Sri Justice Dinesh Maheshwari, a distinguished jurist whose immense contribution to the Indian legal landscape continues to inspire generations of legal minds. His presence today as the chief guest truly elevates the stature of this conference. I welcome you, Lordship. Namaskar. It is with great pleasure that I also extend a very warm welcome to Ms. Lucy Gorman, the Consul General of the United Kingdom for Spain and Andorra. Her esteemed presence underscores the spirit of international collaboration and shared commitment to justice and human rights. I welcome you, Madam. We are delighted to welcome Professor Y.S.R. Murthy, an eminent academician and policy expert whose work at the intersection of law, governance, and human rights has been path-breaking. I also welcome you, sir. I take this opportunity to heartily welcome Dr. Banu Prakash, founder and managing director of Think Justice Foundation and vice president of the World Society of Victimology. His vision, energy, and leadership have been central to the organization of this conference and to advancing the global discourse on victimology. I welcome you, sir. Namaskar. I also extend a warm welcome to Dr. Gunajit Roy Chaudhary, ACS Registrar of our university and convener of ICGCV 2025. His meticulous planning, administrative foresight, and dedication have played a crucial role in making this conference a reality. I welcome you, sir. Where is Registrar Sir? Okay. This conference represents more than just a series of academic sessions. It is a platform for critical dialogue, transnational cooperation, and collective learning. As we bring together scholars, practitioners, policymakers, and students from across the globe, our aim is to challenge conventional thinking, encourage new perspectives, and deepen our understanding of justice and victim rights in a complex global environment. On behalf of the university, I thank all our distinguished guests, particularly guests came from different countries. I welcome you, sir. On behalf of university, I welcome you particularly to this particular conference. And particular students, faculty members from different parts of the country they came, I welcome you all. On behalf of the university, I thank all our distinguished guests, speakers, delegates, partners, and especially our faculty and student volunteers for their contribution to this important academic gathering. Once again, I warmly welcome you all and look forward to the rich deliberations and outcomes that this conference promises to deliver. Thank you one and all. Jai Hind. Namaskar.
A warm welcome is the universal language of connection. Thank you very much, sir, for the generous words of welcome and for setting the tone for this conference. Moving on, as a gesture of respect and gratitude, we now proceed to felicitate the distinguished dignitaries on the dais. May I invite the chief patron of this conference, Professor Dr. K.V.S. Sarma sir, to kindly felicitate our chief guest, Honorable Mr. Justice Dinesh Maheshwari sir, Chairperson of the Law Commission of India. Thank you, sir, for doing the honors. I request the co-chief patron of the conference, Professor Dr. Y.S.R. Murthy, sir, to felicitate our guest of honor, Ms. Lucy Gorman, Consul General of the United Kingdom for Spain and Andorra. Thank you, sir. To offer us a perspective on the guiding vision, the thematic breadth, and the academic contours of this evolving discourse, may I call upon Professor Dr. Y.S.R. Murthy, Co-Chief Patron and former Vice Chancellor of Assam Royal Global University, to kindly address the gathering.
Esteemed Chief Guest, Chairperson, Law Commission of India, Honorable Mr. Justice Dinesh Maheshwari ji, Guest of Honor, Consul General of UK for Spain and Andorra, British Consulate General, Barcelona, Ms. Lucy Gorman, Chief Patron of this conference and Vice Chancellor, NLU Assam, Professor Dr. KVS Sharma, Conference Chair, Dr. Banu Prakash Nunna, Conference Convener, Registrar NLU Assam, Dr. Gunajit Rai Chaudhary, ACS, keynote speakers, paper presenters, other participants, good morning, and a warm welcome to each one of you. Special greetings to those international participants who have traveled significant distances to be with us during this event. As a co-chief patron, it gives me immense pleasure to see that this conference is finally happening, despite many challenges and teething troubles along the way. The first conference was hosted by the RV University in Bangalore around the same time last year in 2024, when I was its Vice Chancellor. It was a resounding success. We are having this second edition of this conference in this historic and wonderful city of Guwahati, which is gateway to the entire northeastern India and indeed South Asia. Law Commission of India is an important statutory body and is tasked with the onerous responsibility of law and policy reform. Despite his hectic schedule, I am happy to see that Chairperson Law Commission, Honorable Mr. Justice Dinesh Maheshwari, has chosen to be with us here today to inaugurate this conference and give his insights. I extend a hearty welcome to our chief guests and also to our guest of honor, Ms. Lucy Gorman. This conference seeks to bridge the gap between research and practice and will focus on a number of new areas, including, among others, child rights, forensic victimology, and also take up affected communities. My compliments to all the researchers and student paper presenters who will be speaking at this conference. I look forward to hearing them. I take this opportunity to profusely thank host of this conference, Professor Dr. KVS Sharma, Vice Chancellor, NLU Assam, for providing able leadership in organizing this conference. The main organizers, Think Justice Foundation and British Society of Criminology, played a very critical role. I wish to acknowledge with deep gratitude significant contributions made by all our sponsors and conference partners, European Automotive Training Company, World Society of Victimology, Northeastern Development Finance Corporation, NEDFI, Taxman Publishing House, Prakruti, Emerald Publishing, and Bank of India for their generous contributions. In particular, I want to mention two persons whom I have reached out in my personal capacity. I want to acknowledge Mr. Sridharan and Mr. Ansh Bhargava, who is the head of sales and marketing for Taxman, and also Mr. P.V. S.L.N. Murthy, Chief Chairman and Managing Director of the Northeast Development Finance Corporation, who responded to our request and contributed to this conference. Today, the world is facing a number of serious challenges, including poverty, terrorism, conflict, newer forms of crime, conservation of environment, sustainable development, and lack of awareness about victim rights and their protection. I sincerely hope that this conference will go a long way in knowledge creation, documentation, and inspire future generations of learners. Thank you.
Thank you very much, sir. We are grateful to you for having outlined the intellectual contours and aspirations that shape this important academic dialogue. We are pleased to welcome the guest of honor from the British Consulate General. May I now invite Ms. Lucy Gorman, Consul General of the United Kingdom for Spain and Andorra, British Consulate General Barcelona, to deliver the special address.
Good morning, everybody. I'm not sure if you can quite see me. I'm not that tall. But fortunately, I have heels on, so hopefully you can see me at the back. So first of all, I wanted to say thank you so much for inviting me to speak at the conference this morning. It really is an honor to be here, and I'm very much looking forward to attending some of the sessions later on in the day. So my name is Lucy. It's been mentioned a few times. And I work for the UK Foreign Office. So I'm the Consul General for Spain and Andorra. And basically what that means is I manage a team of around 40 consular officers that work across 8 consulates in Spain. Spain has the highest number of consular cases for the Foreign Office in the world. So I have a very, very busy team. The kinds of things that we deal with, I thought it might be useful to just briefly set out kind of what I do. And then my idea was to share with you a project that we've worked on in Spain linked to victims of modern slavery, which I hope you will find interesting. So generally, we support people, for example, if a British person dies abroad, we will support their family through that bereavement process. We also deal with victims of domestic violence, victims of rape and sexual assault, child welfare cases, arrests, detentions, quite a broad range of things that we deal with across Spain. And that's probably what we're best known for, is the kind of assistance work. Consular assistance, I think, is what people think of when they think of a consulate. But we also do a lot of kind of prevention and lobbying work, working with our host governments and other organizations and other stakeholders to try to tackle issues. So we work with them to reduce numbers of victims and also to reduce the potential for re-victimization. As the Foreign Office, we actually can't do anything alone because we don't operate in our own jurisdiction. So this means that the only way that we can affect change is actually through others. And so some of those diplomatic skills like networking, engaging at all different levels, listening, and ultimately getting the right people together to tackle an issue is how we try to kind of affect change on the ground. The particular project I was going to share with you, as I mentioned, was linked to victims of modern slavery. Now, between 2016 and 2017, the consular teams in the Balearic Islands in Spain recorded a sharp increase in the number of young British nationals attending the consulate. They were generally young women, sort of between the ages of, I'd say, 18 and 21. And they were presenting, having said that they'd lost their passport, but there was something around their story that the team felt didn't quite match up. So we decided to get some funding to do some academic research to kind of figure out. They were all coming from the same tourist resort, so the same area. So we wanted to understand what was happening to their passports and what was happening to them. What the academic research identified was that essentially their employers, who were generally older male bar owners, were holding on to their passports. So what they were doing was retaining their passports when they started working for them, and then they essentially wouldn't give them back until the end of the season, so maybe 6, 7, 9 months, something like that. They were working with no contract. Their accommodation was tied to their employment, so if they left their job, they would also lose the place where they lived. They were often paid in alcohol and were victims of intimidation and coercion on almost a daily basis. This is something I think that when we think of victims of modern slavery, to be honest, the UK government has been very focused on tackling modern slavery as well in the UK, and this really demonstrated to us that anybody can be a victim of modern slavery, even young British workers in a tourist resort. The research also uncovered something that we hadn't spotted, which was that the male workers in that resort were also becoming involved in the drug market. And when we did some internal analysis, we discovered that 70% of the British people in prison at the time in the Balearics had previously been illegal workers in this tourist resort. So we sort of uncovered also something new that we hadn't been aware of. With this evidence, it meant that the FCO was able, the Foreign Office was able to recognize the vulnerability of this group as victims of modern slavery, and we kind of prioritized work to reduce the number of victims and also support those that found themselves in those situations. So what we first did, we wanted to kind of immediately meet the needs of the victims to reduce vulnerability. So we worked with a British charity to see if they would provide us with kind of fast-track, same-day funding for these victims to make sure that they had somewhere to stay, so they had different accommodation, subsistence, flights home, things like that. We were able to secure that pretty quickly so that we could at least meet their immediate needs. We then had to kind of engage with some stakeholders that, to be honest, we hadn't engaged with before. For example, we went to meet with the bar owners in the tourist resort, some of whom were known to UK police, some of them had previous criminal convictions. And so in order to actually go and meet them, we had to sort of get permission from the National Crime Agency in order to do so. So there were some hurdles to jump over, I think is what I'm trying to say, in order to have a meeting with these people. But I felt it was really important because they were really at the forefront of the whole thing. So we went and spoke to them. We explained to them that a British passport belongs to the government and not the bearer of the passport, and so they were essentially retaining government property. We spoke to them about the illegal practices, and actually, during time and kind of meeting up with them again, we realized that they also had their own issues and their own concerns. And so kind of it ended up being quite a reciprocal, mutually beneficial relationship, because I took some of their information and we had a meeting with the mayor and the local police around other issues like pickpocketing. We also directly engaged with the workers themselves, again, something that we'd never done before. Our consular staff hadn't kind of gone out to this resort and met with these workers, but we did. And we had the team go out and meet with them and talk to them about the fact that the consulate was there and what we could do to help and support them should they become victims. In terms of longer-term prevention, we were obviously aiming to reduce the number of victims and the prisoner numbers that I mentioned at the beginning. So I spoke with the regional government in the Balearic Islands, the president of the regional government and the person in charge of work inspections, and they agreed to increase the number of work inspections in that area to kind of disrupt those exploitative practices. We also work with the Home Office, so a different government department, to generate a campaign So they developed leaflets to be handed out at airports across the UK, handed out to young people travelling out to the Balearics for the summer. That was a really positive campaign, but it kind of brought in another layer of a stakeholder management that we needed to do, because of course it generated media interest, which the regional government and other stakeholders were not massively happy about. So we had to do some work with them as well on that front. Overall, the reason why I wanted to share this example with you was we had a really positive impact with this project, and we saw the number of vulnerable young British nationals, so women, dropped by 35%, and the prisoner numbers that I talked about went down by 80%. So by the end of 2019, 3 years later, we really were seeing no cases at all. We also saw kind of increase to helplines and things like that had been promoted through the leaflets. And the local town hall themselves produced a kind of handbook for bar owners in English so they could understand local laws, how to register workers, and things like that. So overall, it was a really great success, and we were able to use those relationships to actually then go on and work on other issues as well. So, to conclude, because I don't want to take up more of your time, but hopefully it was a bit interesting, the three things that I wanted to share, given that this event is really about sharing ideas and responding to victims in a collaborative way, is that I think what really worked in this case was, one, the kind of open-mindedness and the use of independent and objective research, so grounding it in the reality of the problem, was really helpful to us and stimulated quite difficult conversations with our partners, but ultimately enabled us to start that dialogue because we had that independent research behind us. Also that we were able to work with new contacts and stakeholders, people that maybe we hadn't met previously, people we hadn't even thought of meeting, people we needed to get permission to meet. But that was really key to tackling the issue and to having the outcome we did. So to think about those different stakeholders, I think, is really important. And finally, because of these things, we were able to find solutions for all those involved which did not jeopardize their agendas or compromise their responsibilities. So we devised an effective campaign to reduce harm and victimization. And I will stop there. But thank you very much for listening.
Thank you very much, ma'am, for your address and for joining us on this occasion. We deeply appreciate your presence amongst us today. It is now time for the inaugural address, a moment of significance for this conference. We are honored by the presence of Honorable Mr. Justice Dinesh Maheshwari sir, Chairperson of the Law Commission of India, as the chief guest of the inaugural session. A distinguished jurist and an eminent scholar of constitutional law, Lordship served with distinction as a judge of the Supreme Court of India, having earlier held the office of the Chief Justice of the High Courts of Karnataka and Meghalaya. Throughout his judicial tenure, his lordship has been widely respected for his intellectual rigor, administrative acumen, and deeply humane approach to justice. In his current position as the chairperson of the Law Commission of India, his lordship continues to guide important national conversations on legal reform, institutional accountability, and the evolving demands of justice in a complex and diverse society such as India. With profound respect and honor, we now call upon Honorable Mr. Justice Dinesh Maheshwari to kindly deliver the inaugural address.
Thanks a lot, Madam. So, a very good morning to all. The dignitaries on the dais, professors, particularly the students, ladies, gentlemen. Before coming down to this, I am asked to deliver a so-called inaugural address. What I was wondering today, sitting with this august gathering and the brilliant legal brains, that having served up to the Supreme Court of India, there is a prohibition on us that we can't now practice as advocates in any court of law. So very many times the lawyer in us will keep on asking, well, to argue something, to deliver something. So, but then I suddenly found that if today, if I'm making this presentation before the brilliant legal brains from all across the globe, it is something like arguing a case before a bench of 200 judges. And, well, there could be a verdict going anywhere. But then I thought that, well, I will request all of you to remind yourself of that old jury system, that whatever, even if you want to overrule me, please do it unanimously only, no divided opinions. So thank you very much inviting me. I'm indeed thankful to the organizers giving me a chance to be here with the brilliant legal brains on and also the curious learners on these deliberations on a cause of paramount importance. Friends, in today's fast-paced but emotionally fatigued societies, this kind of a conference organized by National Law University and Judicial Academy Assam in collaboration with Critical Criminology Network of British Society of Criminology and in association with the World Society of Victimology, I'm sure it would go a long way in safeguarding and reinforcing criminology and victimology as essential disciplines, not only in academics, but also in all the relevant fields of law enforcement, while ensuring inclusive growth and providing much needed succor in the given surroundings. The topics of discussion, I was appreciating a wide range of those, ranging from the macro level of policing, law enforcement and justice to the micro analysis pertaining to semiology with special focus on social justice. It indeed shows sincere efforts of the organizers in making this conference a meaningful one. With your permission, I propose to touch upon a few essentials, which would be, I'm sure, which are going to be central to the forthcoming discussions and deliberations in this conference. For our purposes, it would be of interest to revisit Herbert Pecker's two models of criminal processes. The first being the crime control model that sees the suppression of criminal conduct as the criminal justice system's primary function. This prioritizes efficiency, speed, and finality. And second, of course, being the due process model that treats the protection of individual rights as paramount, viewing the process more like an obstacle course. It emphasizes presumption of innocence, rigorous procedural safeguards, judicial oversight, and the right to legal aid, and accepts that some guilty may go free in order to prevent wrongful convictions. We can definitely correlate Pecker's models with crime prevention and victim support in this manner. Crime control model and crime prevention, where we provide proactive policing, quick responses, deterrence through certainty, and then due process model and victim support, where we provide procedural safeguards for the victims, formal rights to information, to be heard, and to protection, like victim protection schemes, to foster confidence in the system, then balanced fairness, and then strengthened reporting when the individuals believe the system will treat both of them and the accused, both them and the accused fairly. Friends, at this juncture, I am tempted to put a glance over the ancient Indian legal systems. In ancient India, crime prevention was rooted in the blend of moral, religious, and legal principles derived from the texts like Manusmriti, Dharmashastra, and Arthashastra. The emphasis was on building a righteous society where dharma, duty and moral order guided the individual's behavior. Education in ethics, social duties, and spiritual values was a primary means to prevent crimes, as it cultivated inner discipline and respect for law. Family and community systems played a strong role in social control. The fear of social exclusion, excommunication or pravasa, and the religious penance, prayashchit, acted as deterrents as much as the formal punishments. On the administrative front, texts like Arthashastra emphasized surveillance, intelligence gathering, and strong deterrence. Kingly duties, the sovereign's duties, included maintaining law and order through vigilant policing, use of spies, guptchar, and ensuring swift and proportionate punishments to discourage wrongdoing. Theft, fraud, violence, corruption were dealt with firmly, and punishments were often graded based on caste and social status. Therefore, a mix of ethical indoctrination, community-based regulation, and state enforcement formed the core of crime prevention in ancient India. Balancing the two models today means crafting policies that deter crime efficiently while embedding robust safeguards that respect individual dignity and encourage victims to seek redress. Present-day India has indeed worked methodically, and now both these models are truly found in Bharatiya Nagrik Suraksha Sanhita 2023, which is not merely a change in the name of the Code of Criminal Procedure. The clubbing of all the measures for ensuring peace and preventing actions in chapters 9 to 12 of Bharatiya Nagrik Suraksha Sanhita, respectively concerning security for keeping peace and good behavior, maintenance of wives, children, and parents, maintenance of public order and tranquility, so as to avoid unlawful assemblies, public nuisances, etc. And preventive action of police. All these go a long way to show that it is indeed for suraksha, that is safety of the public, by preventing the occurrence of the undesirable. On the other hand, the provisions relating to victim compensation scheme, victim treatment, and witness protection schemes indeed ensure the fortification of the faith of all in the criminal justice system, the justice delivery system, like sections 396, 97, 98 of BNSS. Yet, and however, ensuring destination justice in any cause indeed requires ultra-sensitive engagement of every role player. In today's interconnected world, the challenges we face in administering justice in criminal law will transcend legal traditions, geographies, and ideologies. Beneath all these systems yet lies a shared aspiration that law should not merely punish, it should heal, restore dignity, and uphold the values of equity, compassion, and inclusion. Over decades in judiciary, I have observed as to how recourse to and delivery of justice in criminal law often follows a constrained path: prosecution, conviction, and punishment. While institutionally entrenched, this trajectory at times renders justice mechanical and depersonalized, where frequently the prosecution becomes persecution, conviction is unconvincing, and punishment is not of societal nourishment. As the saying goes, behind every crime you condemn, there might be a cry you missed. Justice devoid of context becomes a cold code, rigid and heartless, blind to sufferings. Justice devoid of empathy risks devolving into an impersonal code, technically sound but emotionally and morally inadequate. We must keep reimagining our jurisprudential frameworks to embrace the evolving dimensions of justice, of the frameworks that see the human being behind every case, recognize the structural forces that give rise to crime, and never lose sight of the victim's silent suffering. Our emphasis, friends, must shift from mere visibility to genuine experience. The frequently quoted maxim that justice must not only be done, but must be seen to be done, that served a critical purpose in a developing democracy. But in today's context, we need to modify our approach, that justice must not only be done, it must be felt. Felt by all the concerned, by the victim seeking acknowledgement, by the accused seeking fair process, and by the society yearning for moral coherence. In many jurisdictions, the victims are relegated to mere witnesses, forced to relive the trauma in intimidating courtrooms with minimal emotional or institutional support. Compensation, if it arrives, is too little and too late, as an afterthought. Even if we stand with the principle that it is better to let 100 guilty go free than punish one innocent, we must ask, where is the same fervor when it comes to ensuring dignity, healing, and justice for the victims? Victims who already face systematic vulnerabilities whether on account of socioeconomic deprivation, caste or class-based exclusion, gender identity, ethnicity, or the like causes, are often doubly burdened. Their struggle for justice is not merely legal, but existential. Unless victims are placed at the heart of our systems, we risk perpetuating injustice in their name under the guise of due process. It is essential to acknowledge that though a crime is an offense against the state, but is also a violation against the individuals, families, communities, and their interpersonal and interconnected relationships. The constitutional balance between the rights of the accused and the rights of the victim must not become an arithmetic of exclusion. Friends, in the ancient perspective, if you give a deep thought to that, the crime was in India was considered to be a disturbance of moral order to be set right through a mix of punishment to deter and remove, with compensation to make the victim whole, and reformation to bring the offender back to the righteous path. The kings thus were seen as upholders of dharma. Now, the worst fear was a breakdown of law. Our text warned that without justice, society would fall into Matsya Nyaya, the law of fishes, where big fish eat the little fish. To prevent such anarchy, justice had to be swift, certain, and rooted in moral purpose. Those ethos, those values, well, with, of course, their relevant modulation, need to be applied the present days also. Today, across the world, we witness definitely a shift towards restorative justice, victim-offender dialogues, trauma-informed legal systems, and inclusive rehabilitation. We just had a wonderful presentation by our guest of honor, well, indicating as to how the measures aimed at healing, aimed at ensuring the restoration of dignity are, well, put into place in work by, of course, tireless efforts by them, and well, dealing with all and sundry different kind of individuals with the key word was open-mindedness. We have the examples of New Zealand, where the Maori-led family group conferences create space for healing. The Norway's presence focus on dignity and reform. Canada's that circle of support and accountability, that's a community initiative that aims at creating supports network. And the examples are, well, unending, and well, they are ever expanding. And so these kind of conferences are definitely going to give a great impetus to these efforts. In India, we have embedded victim rights as foundational and not merely ornamental. This spirit finds embodiment like in section 396 of BNSS, where which mandates state governments in coordination with center to create victim compensation schemes. Like 360 of BNSS that provides an unalienable right to the victim of being heard before allowing withdrawal of a case, and thereby ensuring that criminal justice system is more responsive to the needs and concerns of those directly affected. There are schemes like Nirbhaya Fund and then other support centers, legal aid. They do reflect our growing institutional response. Of course, there are very many areas that continue to clamor, albeit mostly in silence, for improvement and improvisation, like the requirements of a differently abled survivor, a transgender, a child victim, or even an ever-increasing now sect of the hapless cybercrime victims. We must not just make space for such survivors, we must lead with urgency, empathy, and resolve. Friends, at this juncture, I propose to dwell into a peculiar class of cases which project a quandary for any law professional. That is where the offender, in the sense of the defined terms of offending, also answers to the description of victim. These dual capacity persona, they need deeper understanding and off-the-cuff approaches. Two categories urgently requiring nuanced engagement are sex workers and drug addicts. In Buddhadev versus Bengal 2022 judgment, the Supreme Court of India recognized sex workers' right to live with dignity under Article 21 of the Constitution. It also directed the police not to harass the consenting adult sex workers and encouraged welfare-based approaches. Well, to give another impetus to our approach, well, I'm tempted to recount that the spirit of the messages and the efforts, like that in the Buddhadev Karmaskar's case, that is brought to life by way of a forceful narrative in a Hindi movie. If you remember, the name was Gangubai Kathiawadi. The story of a woman who, despite being exploited, rose to advocate for the rights and dignity of sex workers. Her journey wasn't about glorifying the profession. It was about reclaiming humanity for those who were written off by the society. The movie broke various norms and taboos and called for legal and social reforms through, of course, emotionally charged storytelling. I'm sure that when discussing about victims, this conference would spare sincere and dignified thoughts towards such faceless and nameless victims, while suggesting improvement in our understanding and operation of the enactments like the Immoral Traffic Prevention Act 1956. Another sect of persons who perforce get marginalized are drug addicts, as was being indicated by the guest of honor also. Essentially, they are the victim of drug abuse. Drug abuse has been traditionally viewed as a form of victimless crime, and while drug abusers face stigmatization from the society and are accountable by virtue of the legal framework, it is very rarely acknowledged that the drug abuser is also a victim of the drug and not just an offender against the law. The operation of Narcotic Drugs and Psychotropic Substances Act 1985, which rightly has to be harsh on the traffickers, could be compassionate towards users who have been used and abused by the real culprits. Those sections 64 capital A and 71 allow for treatment and rehabilitation instead of prosecution. And section 39 and of NDPS provides for power of the court to direct release of an accused found guilty under section 27 on probation if he consents to undergo treatment for detoxification or de-addiction. They need to be operated and made effective with empathy. Empathy, friends, might be garnered by recounting the response of an addict when a senior person asked him, "Why would you poison yourself?" His matter-of-factory answer was, because the poison inside me needs a friend. That wasn't a criminal talking, that was a wounded human being. We must learn to hear such cries and ask ourselves, can punishment nourish as well as restrain? Can it redeem, just not condemn? These are not rhetorical questions. They are moral imperatives for every civilized legal system. Friends, humanizing justice is not about being soft on crimes. It is about being strong in our values. It is about recognizing that every accused has a backstory, every victim carries a scar, every case is an opportunity to affirm our shared humanity, and that it is important to recognize that the inherent humanity of everyone involved in the criminal justice system, the victim, the offenders, as well as the community. I urge sincerely to all of you, the lawyers, the academics, professors, students, to think boldly and act courageously. Question what must be questioned, reimagine what must be reimagined. Let your pursuit of justice be informed not only by the statutes and precedents, but also by the stories, silences, and sufferings. Today we stand beneath a new banyan tree, rooted in our constitution, our courts, and Bharatiya Nyaya Sanhita. And if you listen closely beyond the legal jargon, you will hear echoes of our ancestral wisdom also. That crime wounds not just a statute, but the soul of the society. The victim's pain cannot be an afterthought, it must be our starting point. And the punishment alone does not complete justice. Healing and harmony must follow. It is not an import, it is an homecoming. When we compensate victims, we honor the king's duty in the Manusmriti. When we allow community service, we revive the dharmic principle that even fallen can rise. And when we decriminalize despair, we rediscover the compassion of Ashoka's edicts and the wisdom of our rishis. So friends, let us build a system not known for its delay but accessibility, not rooted in exclusion but in inclusion, that sees the person before the file, the pain before the process, and the potential for healing even in the aftermath of harm. Because in the end, justice must not only be delivered, I am firmly of the view that it must be felt to be effective. Each one of us aspires for a dawn, proclaiming that justice isn't just blind, it is kind too. Thank you very much. I wish this conference a great and huge success. Thank you.
Thank you, Lordship, for your gracious presence and for having delivered an insightful inaugural address. Your words have assuredly enriched this gathering and laid a thoughtful foundation for the deliberations that lie ahead. We're truly humbled. Moving on, I invite Dr. Bhanu Prakash Nunna, Chair ICG CV 2025, and the Vice President of the World Society of Victimology, to present an overview of this conference.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. Our distinguished guest, Honorable Mr. Justice Dinesh Maheshwari, Chairperson, Law Commission of India, Ms. Lucy Gorman, Consul General of UK for Spain and Andorra, British Consulate General, Professor K.V.S. Sharma, Professor Y.S. Amurthy, guests of the dais, esteemed speakers, delegates, and my dear friends. It is my greatest honor and privilege to welcome you all to the second edition of the International Conference on Global Criminology and Victimology, organized by National Law University and Judicial Academy Assam in collaboration with the Critical Criminology Network of the British Society of Criminology, Think Justice Foundation, and in association with the World Society of Victimology. This conference marks a significant milestone in our collective efforts to advance the fields of criminology and victimology. It brings together a diverse and esteemed group of scholars, practitioners, policymakers, and students from within India and around the world. Our theme, Humanizing Justice Practices, Global Perspectives on Building Inclusive Systems for Crime Prevention and Victim Advocacy, calls us to reimagine justice not merely as a punishment, but as a restoration, healing, and transformation. In an era where crime transcends borders and victims' voices often remain unheard, we gather to bridge the gap between academic research and practical solutions that genuinely serve humanity. The global nature of our gathering reflects the universal challenge we face, from cyber crimes that span continents to human trafficking networks that exploit the most vulnerable, from domestic violence that knows no cultural boundaries to economic crimes that devastate entire communities. These issues demand collaborative, culturally sensitive, and inherently human responses. Over the coming days, we will explore innovative approaches to crime prevention that address root causes rather than merely symptoms. We will examine victim advocacy models that center empowerment and restoration. We will share research that illuminates new pathways toward justice that is both effective and deeply human. Over the next 3 days, we'll have 2 keynote addresses, 6 plenary sessions, and over 100 paper presenters in 23 different thematic sessions in this conference. Each presentation, discussion, and interaction represents an opportunity to learn from diverse global perspectives. Whether you come from academia, law enforcement, social work, legal practice, or victim advocacy, your unique insights contribute to our shared mission of humanizing justice. This conference brings together some of the most brilliant minds from across the globe. I encourage all our student participants particularly to take full advantage of the opportunities to network, collaborate, and exchange ideas. I would like to extend my heartfelt thanks to our keynote and plenary speakers who have graciously agreed to share their insights and expertise with us. Your contributions are invaluable and set the tone for the high-quality discourse we aim to achieve in this conference. And to all our session chairs and presenters, I thank you for your dedication and for the rigorous work you have put into your research. Your presentations will undoubtedly spark engaging debates and inspire future research and policy initiatives. As we embark on this intellectual journey together, let us remember that behind every research finding is a human story. Behind every policy recommendation is someone's hope for a safer, more just world. Behind every innovative practice is the potential to transform lives. Let us also take a moment to acknowledge the victims of crime. Our work is ultimately about them, about their stories, their struggles, and their resilience. Let us commit to leaving this conference not just with new knowledge, but with renewed passion for creating justice systems that truly serve all members of our global community. Thank you, and welcome you all once again to the second International Conference on Global Criminology and Victimology 2025. I wish you a great success in the next 3 days. Looking forward to seeing you all and interacting with you all. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Dr. Bhanu Prakash, for the overview. As we draw the inaugural session of the second International Conference on Global Criminology and Victimology to a close, may I call upon Dr. Manikandan Soundarajan, Co-Chair, ICGCV 2025, Founder and Executive Director, Think Justice Foundation, to propose the vote of thanks.
Good morning, everyone. So I think Bhanu and Professor Murthy has already done my part. They have already thanked many of what I'm going to cover, but still it's my duty to do this formally. Distinguished Chief Justice, Honorable Mr. Justice Dinesh Maheshwari sir, Chairman, Law Commission of India, Ms. Lucy Gorman, Consul General of UK for Spain and Andorra, Professor KVS Sharma, Professor Y.S.R. Murthy, esteemed guest of the dais and distinguished speaker, delegates, and the students, and my dear friends. It's my privilege to welcome you all to the second International Conference on Global Criminology and Victimology. I stand here with immense pleasure to acknowledge the people who have been contributing to this conference and making this conference really transformative. On behalf of organizing committee of ICGCV, I'm here to deliver the vote of thanks. First and foremost, I extend my heartfelt gratitude to National Law University and Judicial Academy, Assam, Professor KVS Sharma, Vice Chancellor of NLUJA, Assam, and Dr. Gunajit Roy Chaudhary, ACS, Registrar of NLUJA, Assam. And I thank all the team, IT team, administrative team, and student volunteers for their unwavering support for this conference. My sincere gratitude to the Critical Criminology Network of British Society of Criminology and Dr. Tammy, Chair of the Critical Criminology Network of BSc, who has been tremendous support for this conference as well as the previous one. My sincere appreciation to all the conference partners who supported this conference and also supporting in sponsoring this conference. Prakriti NGO, E8TC India, World Society of Victimology, Northeastern Development Finance Corporation Limited, Taxman Publication, Bank of India, and Emerald Publication. My sincere thanks to Honorable Mr. Uppal Abhivikrama, Member of Parliament, Government of Sri Lanka, for his presence in this conference. We are deeply honored by the presence of all the esteemed speakers who traveled across the world as well as from various parts of India to participate in this conference and to share the knowledge and wisdom to us. My sincere gratitude to Professor Ruwan Udvarge, Chair of Program Committee, for providing his extended support and guidance to us. Also, he has been always available for us whenever we need it. My gratitude to Professor Y.S.R. Murthy, former Vice Chancellor, Assam Royal Global University, Assam, for providing us with the wonderful support as well as extended his guidance. I also thank KK Handik Open University for providing us with this wonderful event, wonderful conference venue for organizing this conference here. My special thanks to Dr. Nandarani Chaudhary, Master of Ceremony. I finally thank our organization, Think Justice Foundation, and the members of Think Justice Foundation, Dr. Banu Prakash Nunna, Mr. Srivati, and as well as there are all other team members who has been putting tremendous effort and hard work from last 4 weeks to make this conference really successful. And I thank all the presenters, participants, chair, and our speakers for joining us this conference, to making this conference very significant, as well as making this conference very successful and making a significant contribution to the field of criminology, victimology, and criminal justice. Once again, I welcome and thank you all for joining us this conference. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Soundarajan. May I request everyone to rise in an attitude of deference for the rendition of the national anthem.
जनगण मन अधिनायक जय हे भारत भाग्य विधाता पंजाब सिंध गुजरात मराठा द्राविड उत्कल बंगा विंध्य हिमाचल यमुना गंगा उच्चल जलधि तरंगा तव शुभ नामे जागे तव शुभ आशीष मांगे गाहे तव जय गाथा जन गण मंगलदायक जय हे भारत भाग्य विधाता जय हे जय हे जय हे जय 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 हे
Thank you. We now conclude the inaugural session and look forward to the insightful deliberations in the sessions ahead. Thank you again.
Sanjay Hazarika, a respected journalist, author, and human rights advocate. Sir is the founder for the Center of Northeast Studies, which has pioneered the innovative boat clinics on the Brahmaputra. Additionally to that, Mr. Hazarika is the author of several acclaimed books, including The Strangers of the Mist and Bhopal, The Lessons of a Tragedy. Sir's work continues to shape Indian academics and public policy. Sir is the distinguished speaker in today's session. I humbly implore you, sir, to grace us on the stage. It is my privilege to welcome again Professor Dr. Y.S. Murthy, former Vice Chancellor of the Royal Global University, as the chair of this keynote session. I hand over the metaphorical mic to you, sir. I hope everyone here has a fruitful time. Thank you so much. Thank you, sir.
After a wonderful inaugural session, it's my pleasure to extend a warm welcome to everyone to the first keynote address on conflict and redress towards a people-inclusive justice. We are indeed fortunate to have Mr. Sanjay Hazarika, a truly outstanding individual with over 4 decades of rich experience, to give this keynote address. As the chair of this session, it's my proud privilege to introduce him to the audience. I have known him and his impressive work for more than 2 decades. He's a versatile personality. He has been a journalist, editor, author, human rights activist, and passionate human rights advocate, researcher, policy analyst, river and rural traveler by his own admission, and a filmmaker. He seems to effortlessly combine these multiple roles. He's an expert on issues relating to the Northeast India and neighborhood, which have witnessed armed conflict for many decades. A veteran journalist, Mr. Hazarika, reported from South Asia for the New York Times for over 16 years. In 2000, he founded the Center for Northeast Studies and Policy Research at Jamia Millia Islamia University in New Delhi and held the Dr. Saifuddin Kichlu Chair for many years. Between 2016 and 2022, he was International Director of the Commonwealth Human Rights Initiative, CHRI, which, under his able leadership, has worked extensively on police reforms, prison reforms, and right to information. He is author of many books, including Bhopal, The Lessons of a Tragedy, the acclaimed Strangers of the Mist on conflict in the northeast of India and its neighborhood, and its successor, 25 years later, Strangers No More, Tales of War and Peace from India's Northeast. He has also co-edited several books, including Hope Behind Bars, and another one on Japan and the Northeast India. Mr. Hazarika has scripted and produced over a dozen documentaries, including on the Brahmaputra River and on governance and conflict. He is a contributing columnist to the Times of India, the Indian Express, Hindustan Times, the Tribune Chandigarh, and the Assam Tribune. He was a consulting editor with the Statesman and the Sunday Guardian. We are indeed looking forward to his address on a very important topic. Before I call upon him to speak, I wish to make a few opening remarks on the topic. Conflict connotes a certain threshold and a protracted nature. It is characterized by use of excessive force, arbitrary killings, rape, torture, targeted arrests and disappearances, widespread destruction of property, displacement, and other serious human rights violations. Impact on civilians, and in particular on women and children, is disproportionate. There is a near collapse of judicial and other institutions in the wake of conflict, and certain inability to protect public order. Women and children face special vulnerabilities. The current social, economic, and political status of women, particularly son bias and other structural issues, are compounded by conflict. Women, children, and others are sometimes scarred by this mindless violence, which has an economic, social, and psychological impact. Genocide is mother of all crimes and the most serious and egregious crime. It just does not concern parties to the conflict, but the entire community of nations and indeed humanity as a whole. It is happening right now with impunity. In a conflict situation, there is a need to ensure that there is no impunity for human rights violations and address effectively hardcore issues of torture, enforced disappearances, extrajudicial executions, and thereby secure justice to the victims. The effort may involve, among other things, seeking truth, criminal prosecutions, reparations, compensation. We also need to take a stand, speak out against the violations, raise public awareness, and ensure that full range of human rights are protected by players on either side of the conflict. In the last few years, many serious international conflicts erupted. We have been witnessing mindless death, destruction, forced starvation, and population displacement in Ukraine, Gaza in Palestine, Myanmar, and several other theaters of conflict. There are many non-international armed conflicts also going on. These conflicts have put a huge question mark over the efficacy of the United Nations and other regional mechanisms. Nuremberg Tribunal prosecutor Benjamin Ferencz famously said, and I quote, "There can be no peace without justice, no justice without law, and no meaningful law without a court to decide what is just and lawful under any given circumstance," unquote. The world has moved on from ad hoc international tribunals for the former Yugoslavia and Rwanda. We have now the permanent International Criminal Court, but it has also been facing serious challenges in its discharge of its mandate. There are significant gaps in international law to address emerging challenges to peace. We need concrete efforts for legal codification to address them. Cyber warfare and lethal autonomous weapons like killer robots have immense potential to derail international peace and security. There are serious gaps in the international legal framework and international humanitarian law to handle these emerging challenges. There are serious concerns about nuclear weapons landing into the hands of terrorists and non-state actors. With some countries acquiring the technology to shoot down satellites, weaponization of outer space is a serious challenge. We need promotion of tolerance, understanding of others, international understanding, non-violence, elimination of poverty, sustainable environment, human rights, and social justice. Education and mass media can play an important role in building a culture of peace. Comprehensive peace education can indeed have a transformational role. More than ever, we feel the urgent need to address root causes of conflict and resolving issues through dialogue and diplomacy. The world is longing for redress, peace, and justice. The world today needs, more than ever, true international criminal justice and legal accountability. The United Nations needs to focus on understanding not only the key drivers of conflict, but also the conditions for durable peace, be able to anticipate and address root causes and design and implement conflict resolution strategies for effectively preventing these causes from growing. There is a need to identify the causes, clarify the historical positions, bring parties together to talk, and enable them to evolve a solution by themselves, and monitor and follow up. National human rights institutions have a critical role in addressing conflict and related issues. 2015 Kyiv Declaration on the role of national human rights institutions in conflict and post-conflict underscored the need to prevent conflicts and ensure respect for human rights and protection in conflict and post-conflict situations. It also stressed the need to promote access to justice and contribute towards transitional justice processes and pay particular attention to marginalized groups. As you know, Goal 16 of the Sustainable Development Goals, SDGs, underscores the need to promote peaceful, just, and inclusive societies. With these few opening remarks, I hand over the floor to Mr. Sanjay Hajarika to enlighten us on conflict and redress towards people-inclusive justice. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Murthy, for a very detailed introduction. Sometimes I think the introduction is as long as one's speech. But ladies and gentlemen, thank you for your attention, and I hope your attention stays. Thank you, Professor Murthy, my old friend and fellow activist. Dr. Bhanu, tireless organizer, I don't know where he is, of this program for the next few days. Dr. Gunajit Roy Chaudhary and Professor Sharma, I don't know if the last two are here. And I'm deeply conscious of the honor you've done me by making me your keynote speaker here. I'm especially grateful and somewhat intimidated because I've looked at the list of speakers and past attendees and paper presenters and think I'm woefully undistinguished and unqualified. There are many others you could have turned to, but you've decided to allow me to inflict my thoughts on you, so here goes. Before I start, I'd like all of us to remember that 80 years back to the day yesterday, one of the worst calamities befell the human race. The blinding power of the atomic bomb, which obliterated vast parts of Hiroshima and killed 70,000 persons instantly. A second nuclear device exploded over Nagasaki 3 days later and killed 40,000 people that day itself. There were victims. They are remembered. But I wonder if their families, any of them, those who survived, got even minimum justice. And as Professor Murthy said, we need to really work for sanity on our fragile planet. Today we meet in Guwahati. It's not my hometown, but this is my home state, so I welcome all of you who are coming here for the first time to it. The first song, the state anthem, which is played always at the beginning, it talks about, I want to see your face again. You know, it's a call to the inner loyalty, longing of a child of the soil for his motherland. Now, this is a very, I hope you'll get a chance to move around and see it a bit, apart from shuttling between the hotel and here. It's a bustling, growing metro with new flyovers and old ones, multiplexes, there are fashion shows, the Lit Fest, the spanking new malls, stores and hotels. All these are accompanied by the normal pain pangs of a burgeoning city. Residents complain of dust and pollution, very high AQI. I live in Shillong, which is up in the hills, 5,000 feet, so the AQI in my place near my home is 9. And there are lots of traffic jams. It's once forested hills are under acute pressure to make space for homes. For those who are flooding into the city, there's a problem with annual flood control, sewage control, drinking water supply, and these remain problems to be resolved. The government is proposing a satellite city to be built some 50 kilometers away on the site of a former closed paper mill. So the effort is to decongest Guwahati. This is a city with a history going back many centuries. It may not be my favorite city, but one can't wish it away. It's buzzing at night. Should go to a few bars. And in the new year, holiday season, the police stand guard with breath analyzers to catch revelers and drinkers who may have had a bit too much of alcohol. 20 years ago, it would be hard for you to imagine 20 years ago, Guwahati 20 years ago, where fear stalked the city and emptied the streets. There had been bomb blasts. There were paramilitary checkposts every few hundred meters. The city would fall silent after dusk or even before, as people hurried home to the safety of their homes. And if there's one thing that has been lost, it's this kind of fear. Guwahati may not be many things, but it has got energy. Yet many people in the state and across the country and across the world are unaware of a past on which an earlier generation lived through. Yet it is this change, plus a stabler political process, that has enabled new business enterprises to open, enabled a burst of creativity, energy, and enterprises to ride the wave. Earlier this year, an investment Assam summit drew pledges of some 4 lakh crore rupees. For our international guests, I find it difficult to translate that, but it's several $1 billion worth of investment promised. We'll have to see how much of it actually comes in. But work has already begun with semiconductor factories by the Tatas, Green Infra, and plans for what you saw, the airport in which many of you came to. There will be a new airport ready in a few months' time, much bigger. But I wish to point out this could be endangered by vigilante threats as well as a wave of actions that may disturb not just the social equilibrium, but also the promise of these major investments that are coming into the state. For this is the cusp of the Northeast. The Northeast, which has 96% of its borders with other countries, landlocked, with 4 neighbors with whom we share good and bad relations: Myanmar, Bhutan, the Tibet Autonomous Region of China, and Bangladesh. Nepal is not far away. So in my talk, I propose to draw from my own experiences as well as recorded and documented events and issues. I just spoke about a time when Guwahati was shrouded in fear in the early 2000s. That blanket of stress began to lift after 2 major security operations against large insurgent groups from Assam, which were based in neighboring countries, one in Bhutan and Bangladesh. And those events are spaced 6 years apart. The one in Bhutan in 2003 was carried out by the Royal Bhutan Army with inputs from India. The then Indian Army chief said that the Bhutanese had neutralized, I put that in quotes, over 1,000 rebels in the attacks on 3 armed groups. Now, one doesn't hear what happened to the families of the rebels. Did the leaders who were captured or surrendered, did they seek compensation for them, although their kin had fought against the state? I mean, you do know that treason or waging war against the state in this country carries the death penalty. What of those who did not participate or were reluctantly and unwillingly part of this process, their families? The record is silent on them. The only person who referred to them kindly was the current Queen Mother of Bhutan, then the principal queen of the fourth king, His Majesty Jigme Singye Wanchuk. Her name is Ashi Dorje Wangmo Wanchuk, and she wrote of how, after the victory of the Bhutanese army, it was the first time the Buddhist country had gone to war in a century. Prayer lamps were lit, seeking peace and solace for all fallen soldiers, including the Indian rebels. In Bangladesh, security agencies detained the chairman of the United Liberation Front of Assam and his colleagues, and later the leaders of other ethnic armed factions. They were handed over to Indian officials on the border, and in the space of a few years, key militant networks had been crippled, and intense, relenting pressure exerted by Indian security forces ensured there was no respite. This forced groups to come to the negotiating table. And for those who are in dialogue, it ensured that they remain connected in conversations, no matter how unhappy they may have been. That's why, to some of us, Assam seems almost to be in hyperdrive as of now, rushing to catch up on what I call the lost years. In my view, while these were some of the triggers for the gradual economic transformation visible in different parts of the Northeast, the key changes was internal, because internal responses and perspective shaped how people drove change. And I'll explain this. The Bhutan reversals for the ULFA and its allies led to retaliation by the guerrillas on soft targets. First, a number of Hindi-speaking speakers, residents in Assam, were gunned down. And on the country's anniversary of its Independence Day in 2004, that's 21 years ago, August 15th, just a week away, 14 people, including 10 school children, died in a bomb blast at a town called Dhemaji in the north of the state. Public anger grew against ULFA and its descent from the sobriquet, our boys, quote unquote, to Vidrohi, anti-state, was rapid. For once, public opinion, goodwill, and support is lost to an armed rebellion, there is little ground that can be recovered. For an insurgent group, it's the equivalent of losing an election mandate. The families had to deal with trauma and stress, much on their own, and with limited access to counseling. The chairman of the armed group today lives in Assam, under protection. His wife is a poet and novelist. Several years after the bomb blast, after he came out of jail, Mr. Rajkhwa visited the home of a family whose daughter had died in the blast. He apologized for what he acknowledged as a heinous crime, quote unquote, and quote, a black day for his organization, and sought forgiveness. What is illustrated here, I think, is that a semblance of justice to victims of a non-state group can be brought about not by armed pressure from the state's forces or by law, but by public resistance and revulsion. In this case, a change in public attitude forced a non-state armed group to announce a change in tactics, strategy, and ideological perspective. I want to share with you some of my experiences in coming face to face with those who experienced conflicts, because as a journalist and a writer and a filmmaker, I have covered conflicts in the region and outside the region, in Bangladesh, in Sri Lanka, and in Myanmar and Tibet, and also in Afghanistan. But I began to see those who I reported on, whom I interviewed, and whose work, with whom I began to work. I began to see them not as victims, not as sufferers, but as resilient people with agency. I think that approach is important. I was working at that time with a research team in the state of Nagaland and Assam, here in the Northeast, on the impact of conflict on women. We met many whose lives had been changed irrevocably by decades of violence that had gripped the states. Each family, each individual had stories to tell of personal loss and bereavement, of physical and emotional trauma. For many of them, it was the first time that anyone from a different part of India had visited their villages, leave aside their homes, sat among them and listened. And these are stories that I believe India needs to know, but does not. Many Indians have not cared to know, and contributing to what the chairman of the Law Commission talked about, silences and silencing and suffering of voices on the margins. And this is where justice must be founded and anchored in such situation in our times. It must start with a conversation, not with a definition of law. It must start with a conversation with those who suffered to find out what they need, not what the state wants to give them or a legal response seeks to address, but what they want and what is needed to meet those concerns. War and conflict, as we all know, are devastating to social and cultural institutions because they impact societies and individuals. Every person who has survived conflict is in some way scarred by her or his experience or experiences. And it takes both people and society a long time to come to terms with what happened. Forget about healing. That's another step. And on these research trips, one of the stories I wanted to share with you was about a woman in the state of Nagaland who shared an experience of her family's flight from government forces. There was an insurgency in Nagaland, as you know, in the 50s, 60s, and 70s, even until the 80s. She was a baby at the time, but her mother, who was running away, hid her in the hollow of a tree, thinking that she'd come back and retrieve her when it was safe. It was 3 days before she could come back. The child lay inside that hollow, hungry, frightened, alone. And I thought, what would she have thought? What would she have gone through? What kind of an impact would this have left on her? And she answered that. The trauma haunted her. And as soon as she was old enough, she went into the jungle to fight the army, to join the Naga army, to join her father, who was a member of the Naga army fighting the Indian state. It was only much later that she came to terms with what had happened to her village, to herself and her father, who was killed in the course of battles with Indian security forces. She learned forgiveness and turned to the church, which is a very powerful institution in Nagaland and other hill states of the Northeast. So to say that women have faced violence in situation of conflict is to state the obvious. But what this means in terms of impact is something that's still being studied. Many of you are doing that. While the most obvious impact is physical or sexual violence, the psychological scarring as a result of prolonged exposure to brutality and violence has an even deeper impact on the well-being. Women find themselves particularly at the receiving end of violence from 3 fronts: the state, the non-state armed groups, and a corresponding escalation of domestic violence. The violence of rape Sexual abuse and assault leads to emotional trauma and what we all know as post-traumatic stress disorder, PTSD. And this is being understood only really in the past few years, in our area anyway. For those of you who are from the UK, you would have seen that in Northern Ireland and other such situations. So facilities like trauma centers or counseling centers for such cases are few and far between and totally inadequate to deal with the complexity and scale of the problem. Women in these situations are not just mothers of children and wives of the wounded, of those killed or those who've disappeared. They're innocent victims of wars not of their making. They suffer as civilians with greater restrictions placed on them. They are assaulted, raped, humiliated, beaten, and murdered during conflicts. They are displaced, turned out of their homes, disinherited, widowed, and orphaned. They lose their children to bullets and beatings. Many just disappear without a trace. Others are trafficked across state and national borders and face a nightmarish lifetime of sexual abuse and neglect. Before we started on the field survey, and I thought this was important to share with you here, we decided to use a questionnaire which is posited on a set of questions developed by the National Institute of Health of the United States, which are internationally accepted as indicative of whether a person has suffered from or suffered from PTSD. And this was made a prerequisite to the identification of so-called victims to be interviewed. So the questions were the following. In your life, have you ever had any experience that was so frightening, horrible, or upsetting that in the past months you, one, have had nightmares about it or thought about it when you did not want to? Number two, tried hard not to think about it or went out of your way to avoid situations that reminded you of it? Three, you were constantly on guard, watchful, or easily startled. Four, felt numb or detached from others, from activities or your own surroundings. So the role of research, as we all know, in such areas is critical. And we had 4 questionnaires, not one. One was for the personal response assessment, the PRA discussions. The second was interview scheduled for women victims. A third was for NGOs, civil society groups, and other organizations. And the last was for government officials, administrators, lawyers, police, and so on. And this, I think, helped people to share experiences of coping with the realities of daily life. What also worked, and to me this is another aspect which is important, is that the research teams in both states were, quote, local, which means they spoke the local language. In Nagaland, there is one linked language, but there are 16 languages for 16 tribes. In Assam, there are many languages, although Assamese is the lingua franca. So we need to dialogue in the language of those who have suffered, not just through translators and interpreters. And without that knowledge, justice becomes an empty drum. Now, the loss that women face is not just emotional or physical, but transfers into economic and social spheres. Most women face a decline in social legitimacy and find themselves relegated to the fringes of society with no one to care for them or to speak on their behalf. And since they form the bulk of the unemployed and uneducated, they find themselves unable and ill-equipped to take on the burden of the household, and as a result, become completely poverty-stricken. Young women, widows are forced to head households, even though in a patriarchal feudal setup, they have no or little access to land and property. And in tribal societies, women carry a heavy economic responsibility. They do, in Nagaland, do extensive work in farmlands and carry on with normal life, with normal chores to sustain their households, whether it's washing, cooking, fetching of water and firewood, and the bringing up and nurturing of children. And at times of conflict, it is well established that women's access to public spaces become even more restricted, and their mobility is further hampered by the presence of security forces and armed militias. All too often, their bodies become the site of battle, with both sides treating them as the spoils of war. Women who lose their, quote, honor, unquote, find it extremely difficult to lead normal lives and live down the stigma. So there is a breakdown of structures and norms of behavior, and the results are visible in atrocities and human rights abuses which are extensively reported by media. But how do women especially cope in such difficult and uncertain conditions? The uncertainty and lack of opportunities among the drivers of large-scale migration of young men and women from the northeast to urban centers across India. Large numbers of what I call the children of conflicts are increasingly leaving their homelands for education and jobs elsewhere in the country. There are large numbers who, for instance, flock to JNU, to Delhi University and elsewhere every year. People cope informally, not through formal mechanisms of justice and law, but the informal challenge of out-migration. Thus, in a neighborhood of Delhi known as Patel Nagar, there are local vegetable sellers from the area who've picked up the Manipuri language because there are so many Manipuris living there. A village in the Manipur hills diverted funds, official funds. There's like good use of, good diversion of, that's what they said to me the other day, of official funds, says to set up a student hostel in Delhi for their own youth where they could live safely and get home-cooked food made by a village cook. Restaurants from the northeastern states serving traditional cuisines and owned by people from here have sprung up in Tony neighborhoods and middle-class places near university campuses and cater to all income groups. In Delhi, Bombay, Hyderabad, Bangalore, Jaipur, Goa, and Chennai, people from the northeastern states are visible and employed in the service sector in overwhelming proportion to their own population. This is significant, but we must see it as a coping strategy. This is how people are coping with the pressure under which they live. But we also need to look at the other side of the social dimensions of this conflict. What does a movement of human resources and human capital in such large numbers mean for a small conflict within the state? Do these youth ever go back? And if so, to what? Now, there are downsides to this out-migration. Those without an effective support system become extremely vulnerable. Those who don't have jobs, who don't own properties and restaurants, they become very vulnerable to racial discrimination or prejudice based on the basis of personal appearance. Now, some of you perhaps are coming to this region for the first time. If you travel around, you'll see that people look somewhat different to other parts of India. And this becomes a flashpoint of prejudice in other metros in this country. So there's violence and trafficking. There's the feminization of the AIDS epidemic, and it's becoming visible, though it is less spoken of these days. Drug addiction is spoken about, but this remains an area of growing concern for social and health activists. Conflict, what does conflict mean for people? Very simply, it means that states cannot deliver basic services of health and education on a sustained, uninterrupted level, placing communities and remote villages at risk. And we did go into these remote villages, and we came across many striking experiences and stories. Time and again, we saw how a person in power with agency, sensitive to local fears and securities and to insecurities and to local customs, could make a difference in the way a conflict is handled. Another observation is in many of these cases, we were among the few independent groups from other parts of India to have visited these villages and engaged with the villagers and the women in half a century. That shows the gap and also shows how the gap can be bridged initially, at least not by law, not by the policy of reparations, but by conversations over a cup of tea. For many people, still do not understand in these areas, especially in the villages, the concept of nyaya or justice mechanisms. There's also the challenges of documentation, and some of you, if you're going to work on these areas, you will find this. Thus, while victims were willing to recount their experiences, some were reluctant to speak on camera or even be recorded and photographed. Those who spoke also insisted on not to be identified by name, quite a few of them, for reasons of security. And in the few cases, they didn't even want their villages to be mentioned. This shows the extent of fear and trauma decades after the conflicts were over that continues to hold these places in thrall. The shadow of injustice remains dark. Now, bearing witness truly is challenging. It can be also disturbing because it involves listening to, watching, and reading the testimonies of victims. This can be especially painful when we realize, as researchers and others, professionals, academics, that virtually none of the victims had either access to or knowledge of compensation, compensatory justice, by getting to the laws and courts, or they didn't even know how to access the administrative system, i.e. the government, to address the harm that they had suffered. So the nightmare persists for those who remain in the shadows because they stay unhealed and unreached. In Mizoram, a state where I've been traveling quite a lot and working on a new book these past 2 or 3 years, there are cases where people speak very angrily of even neighbors because they see them walking around freely, and these are people who attacked their families because they were acting as government informers. So these unaddressed issues, as well as physical and mental harm and trauma, need to be faced by state, non-state, and civil society groups, as well as the international fora and discourse on human rights, as Professor Murthy has said. Because the lack of justice, and one has seen this up close, has bred a sense of impunity among both state and non-state actors, as well as rent seekers and the quasi-state, which are patronized by government networks and power brokers. In Mizoram, where there was a 20-year insurgency, survivors told me that they felt they were caught between a hammer and an anvil. And one elected official said to me that people didn't live at the time. They just survived. And one interesting part of coping in the case of Mizoram as well as Nagaland was that since there was no redress or did not appear to be redress, Since people just didn't know how to go about reaching official mechanisms, they turned to prayer and prayer groups, seeking faith and peace in the divine. This survival and coping mechanism was also apparent from our work, as I said, in Nagaland, but also in Assam, and has turned out to be crucial to how people manage their lives after traumatic events. Since many of the women that we interviewed at that time were illiterate, as I said, they didn't know the mechanisms of the state and who to approach for help. And they were completely unable to understand why this was happening to them, why it had happened to them, this random violence and torture. And just speaking to the research teams, and that's why we had to go very carefully and tread very softly, recreated an old sense of pain, fear, and trauma. So it's very, very challenging to work on these areas. What did help them, they said, was the knowledge that they were not alone, that the suffering was part of a larger community or tribe trauma. Context, they say, is everything. It starts with conversations and listening. It's important to respect what survivors tell us, to respect what they reveal, and also to respect where they wish to retain confidentiality. Winning the confidence of people takes time and is emotionally draining. Yet strangely, it is often therapeutic for the sharer of stories as it is for the listener. And as I said, religion plays a huge role, but there are times when, because of the lack of medical and legal services, but there are times when, as a result of displacement, such help was difficult to access. And we will find that such accounts are often repetitive in terms of experiences shared and stories told, of the nature of the relationship between victim and oppressor, as well as between the state and non-state, and ordinary people who find themselves caught up in a cycle of hatred, revenge, grief, and unmitigated injustice. So the sharing of such stories also, I think, works as a form of agency of political intervention and empowerment, building bridges between communities. Way back in 2011, when India's national health policy was being drafted, and I wanted to share this with you, some of us drew on the experience of this research project. And we were able to advocate for the setting up of networks of counselors, psychiatrists, and wellness centers to the then Planning Commission, which put it in its final document on health policy. It was an effort to help people cope with PTSD and PTSS, but it's now 15 years. The number of psychiatrists hasn't grown. Counseling centers remain inadequate. So field experiences need not end in PhDs and conference papers and academic books. They need to be translated into workable policies through which various spaces of negotiation and advocacy with government take place so that they positively impact those who are the subjects of the field work and research. I'll tell you a story from my own personal experience which changed my life, and there are many events which change our lives to a little or for better or worse. But this was on a river journey. You talked about river journeys. 30 years ago, I was traveling on a ferry from a river bank on this great river, the Brahmaputra, which is here, which divides Assam into two. And I was traveling on this ferry to the great island of Majuli. If you haven't been there, I suggest that you go there, the heart of the river. And I heard a story that was to transform my life. A young woman had died in childbirth on the ferry coming in. We were taking the ferry going back. She couldn't get to the hospital on time. As a curious journalist, I mean, there are still curious journalists, I researched the issue and I found to my horror that Assam had the worst maternal mortality ratio in India, nearly 500 per 100,000 live births. That meant in very simple terms that so many people died giving birth mostly in rural areas. I did more research and found that 8% of the state's population of 35 million, now it's more, lived on 2,000 islands on the river. This was a unique challenge in a unique geography and needed a unique answer, which had to be very simple. You couldn't go everywhere by road because there are no roads. You couldn't build bridges everywhere, and you certainly couldn't take helicopters. So the only way you could deal with health crisis was by boat, taking teams by boat. So there was a team from the MIT Design Cell and we designed a health boat clinic to help. Now I met the chap who helped design it last week in Delhi. He has a health innovation lab in Bangalore. We met after 20 odd years. And we designed a boat which would take healthcare to islands. We tied up with the Assam government after a few years and the National Health Mission. And thanks to the support of the government, over the past 15 years, we have 15 boats in as many districts with some 250 staff, doctors, nurses, lab techs, pharmacists, community workers, and we reach more than 250,000 people with health care, focused on women and children. So lives are saved and sustained, and that ultimately is the test of our lives and our work. Is the world that we work in, is it better today or than it was yesterday? Will it be better tomorrow? And this was providing health with a rights approach. Not as a service, an act of charity, but it is the right of people to survive well, to have an opportunity for the future. It is another way of ensuring justice, for it protects life itself, that most fundamental and fragile of things. There is a short film which the BBC made on this, and I'd like you to see it if it's possible for the IT team to show it. And then I'll have closing remarks. Where is...
Imagine living on an island in the middle of a vast river. No roads in, no bridges out. An endless stretch of water, separating you from the world beyond. And imagine if somebody falls ill. This is a journey through Assam, amid the rivers, with one question. How do some of the remotest parts of India receive medical care? Our search for an answer starts from the banks of a small industrial town in northern Assam called Tinsukia. And this boat, well, on a usual day, it's meant for tourists. But today, it's much more than that. It's a crew on a task, go island to provide healthcare. Doctors, nurses, lab technicians, a clinic on the water set to depart. Over the next 2 days, my colleague Bimal and I are going to be traveling with this boat crew to try and understand the state of medical care in the islands. We're heading to a secluded village deep in the forest, nestled in the middle of the Siang River, known as Laika Pamua. This island is just one amongst hundreds spread across the Brahmaputra River. These islands are home to nearly 2.5 million people, around 1/10 of Assam's population. As we make our way through the narrow tributaries, we make a pit stop. There's a conversation going on the crew that whether these children here are vaccinated or not, and I don't think the kids like it very much. As more patients come in, the crew set up a small desk with the doctor and the pharmacist. They've actually stopped the boat slightly ahead, and they've done it for two reasons. One is that they wanted to look out for the patients here who are very far from the camp that they'll be setting up for. And so it's been exclusively set up for them, and there are people coming here. There's a mother who came with a 1.5-year-old child who had a fever, and they're being looked after right now. They're being given medicines. The medicines are in the boat. The second reason why we stopped is because the boats had to be changed.
जहाँ पर कैंप हमारा कैंप साइड होता है उसमें जाने के लिए हमारा वो जो वाटर लेवल है वाटर लेवल इज वेरी लो इसलिए हम ये बड़ा वाला ये शिप्स नहीं जाता है वो कैंप साइड में नहीं जाता है
क्योंकि पानी शैलो है वहाँ पे
पानी कम होता है इसलिए नहीं जाता है इसलिए हम ये फाइटर बोट लेकर हम वहाँ चला जाता है
Fighter boat. You heard that right. Imagine a big boat. Make it smaller, and smaller even. Add a roof with tarpaulin and straw. Voila. This can navigate on shallower water. We then set off. But eventually the crew looked to stop again. There is a distress signal that they've received. So they've made another stop at one of the nearby islands, and they've done it because there is a patient here who needs a drip, essentially a saline water drip. And they've done that for this patient, and they've already off-boarded the doctor and the nurses, and they're just going up their house, and so have we. She must be 70 or 80 years old, 75 or 80 years old is what they're saying. She's in quite a condition. Her name is Bir Soni Tara, and at her age, medical care becomes crucial. But how does that crucial medical care happen, if at all?
মানে কাপিল কে বলা মান জয় জয় সাংকলো কুবিরা রাখ বহিব সাংকলো কুবিরা রং লাগাং হাই পয়সা হাই না যাও কুবিরা গাম না লগ লাই কাজে হানো কাপিরা বল কি নাই বং ইয়াপ না হাম পাইলানা গবলো আর বুলক পাইতারো গব পাইব গুইজান অকয়লপ মেডিকেল অলপ অকয় তিনচুকিয়া অকয় চিভিল অলপ গব পাইব না রকনো ngolukano koy upay do upay kama bonna.
Remember Tinsukia? That's the town where our journey began. It had taken us 3 hours to get to this island. In case of an emergency, Bir Soni Tara's family would have to make a long and daunting journey. Back on the waters, we make our way to Laikapamua, this small forest village with a population of over 3,000 people. A boat clinic like this makes only 2 rounds in a month to an island like Laikapamua. So this becomes quite an opportunity. Immunizations for children and health checkups for expecting mothers. But many islanders told us that twice-a-month service was not enough. And in case of an emergency, they struggle to get medical care. 26-year-old Sushmita Pegu is one of them, an expecting mother who has traveled a kilometer to reach this camp.
Arus malang lam te hati kolok motor dan noloi dula kendunge. Bonai bi kumolo bonai bi pai kumona tik tani okubida dan neolo. Ai po olok ke kolok okubida da. Bagam pi emergency serious na kara agada man lam tel sipak tani.
This was something we came across often in our journey. This was what a mother on another island told us.
Kinam gat mo kana ngulti tibiang tara.
The boat clinics in Assam started in 2005 by a non-governmental organization called the Center for Northeast Studies and Policy Research. In the years that followed, the government began to invest in the program via the National Health Mission that aims to address the medical needs of underserved rural areas. we took the concerns of the islanders to the National Health Mission.
These riverine islands are shifting islands. Today's shape will not be there tomorrow. Today's spread will not be there for tomorrow. The bigger stars, we have permanent presence in the form of subcenters. However, large-scale hospitals and to provide electricity for such large-scale operations is a big challenge.
Officials didn't specify if they were planning to increase the frequency of the boat clinic service to address the concerns of the islanders. The challenge of access to islands is also why the boat clinics began in the first place.
Many years ago, I was traveling on the river, and I was going in a ferry actually from one side of the river to this great island in the heart of the river called Majuli. Then I found to my horror that this young woman, then in her teens, had been carried from a village after a difficult pregnancy to catch a ferry to the mainland where there was a hospital, but she didn't make it in time. So there were two deaths in a way, not just the mother, but also mother and unborn child. And that really was the start of the journey. And I said to myself that there needs to be a way of closing this gap, of bridging this gap. And what perhaps better way than by boat?
It's been nearly 2 decades since Hazarika's fateful journey through the rivers. Over the years, several boat clinics came up across the Brahmaputra, but life on these boats can be quite challenging.
এবাৰ মানে এনেকুৱা হৈছিলে সেই জংঘলখিনিত মানে আমি এটা সাইডৰ পৰা আহি আছো বটলৈকে তাৰছত এই ফ্ৰন্ট সাইডৰ পৰা মানে এজাক হাতী আহি আছিল তেতিয়া আমি টিমটো আমি জংঘলত সোমাই দিলো এই জংঘলত সোমাই কিনে ৰাতি মানে 8টা লৈকে আমি জংঘলত মানে ঘুৰি থাকিব লগা হৈছে ৰাস্তা বিচাৰি পোৱা নাছিল লাষ্টত মানে বটৰৰ পৰা আমাৰ দুজনমান ষ্টাফ গৈছে গৈ কিনে মানে আৰু তেতিয়া আৰু এজনী আমাৰ লগত এনএম আছিল তেতিয়া এনেকুৱা টাইম হৈ গৈছে ৰাতি মানে গটে 3 মান্থ প্ৰেগনেন্ট আছিল তেতিয়া তাৰ গটে ৰাতি মানে পেটৰ বিহত মানে শুব পৰা নাছিল কিছুমান বহুত এনেকুৱা মানে সিচুৱেচন পাৰ কৰিছো আৰু
In the midst of these waters, you're forced to think, what does the future hold? In the long wait for accessible medical care, thousands of lives hang in the balance. The questions remain. Where do you go when an emergency happens? How fast do you get there? Are these boats enough?
I'll be closing very shortly, so I don't want to keep you from lunch. But, I don't want to repeat a lot of the things that I've said and others have said and more will say about resilience, robustness and rehabilitation, restorative justice, but you need innovation. You need something that will break the cycle. In my mind, many stories still remain untold. That's our job, yours, especially younger people, researchers, students. Many tragedies remain undocumented, many voices unheard. And as long as that remains undone, incomplete, so will our work be incomplete. And the democratic deficit that this adds up to is too extensive not to map and too dangerous not to address and remedy. So I thank you for your patience. I wish your deliberations success, but I also wish that they may bring succor to those in need. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Sanjay Hazarika, for a comprehensive coverage of the issues relating to conflict. And normally we think of criminal prosecutions, compensation, reparations, seeking truth, etc. But I was really struck by the fact that having conversations can also be a very potent and effective instrument. And also the trauma centers and other things that you have described Thanks a lot for doing a comprehensive review of the conflict in Assam, Nagaland, Mizoram, and other places. And while talking about this, I'm just reminded of a few personal experiences. I once went to attend a victim solidarity rally in Manipur, and I ran into a 75-year-old gentleman, a venerable old gentleman, whose son was killed by security forces in a case of mistaken identity. And later on, they organized a compensation for him and in a public function. And he told the person, the public official who was trying to give a 5 lakh rupees compensation to him, he said, I will kill your son and give you 10 lakh compensation. Will you accept it? I am unable to take the face of that 75-year-old gentleman from my mental imagery. And I also met a few women who have been widowed by conflict in Manipur again. And again, these are the cases of some few suspected anti-national elements, underground elements who have been killed, but they were innocent persons, and the security forces had killed them, and these women have organized themselves as victims of extrajudicial execution. I met 5 of them in a closed room, and I heard them for about an hour, and it was a cathartic experiences. And they were not given assistance by the government because their husbands are supposed to be from underground elements, suspected underground elements. So they fell off from the welfare radar of the government. And long years back, I attended this Durban World Conference on Racism, Racial Discrimination in 2001. And there was a victims' voices that was organized as a part of that conference. And I heard the victims of genocide in Rwanda, and the narratives were so shocking, and it takes several hours and to get over and to even to confront what really happened to them. And Mr. Sanjay mentioned about post-traumatic stress disorder and other long-lasting psychological effects. It's indeed true, and a conference of this type should also have victims' voices, a corner for. In fact, I have had a chance to listen as a part of the Human Rights Commission's work, victims of HIV/AIDS, and also manual scavenging, and a few other all of them, their voices must be heard. We must know their lived realities in order to do justice for them. And with these few words, and thank you very much, Mr. Sanjay, for a comprehensive, please give a big round of applause to him. And thanks a lot. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Professor Murthy. Thank you so much, Professor Zarika, for the enlightening session. And now I request Dr. Upal Abhay Vikrama, Member of Parliament, Sri Lanka, to please grace us on the stage and hand over the mementos to the respected dignitaries. Thank you so much, sir. We can now proceed with the lunch break. The thematic sessions shall be beginning from 2:30 p.m. Thank you so much.